well, thanks for coming and being a guest. I appreciate this. Can you just talk a little bit first about your current role at University, U of D Mercy?
Sure. So, well, my name is Prasad Venugopal, and I've been at the university for now, this is my 28th year.
Oh, wow.
And I'm a professor of physics, and I have been affiliate faculty in African American Studies for a very long time. And physics is a service program, which means we don't have majors, but we're part of the chemistry department. We used to be part of engineering, but now we're part of chemistry. So that's what I've been doing, teaching physics, and I teach one course for the African American Studies program, which is also part of our core curriculum.
Oh, wow. I was never a physics person in school. That I was the humanities major, but over the last several years, I've really gotten deep dives, into physics and stuff.
Right.
But you've
And
been
that's
doing
my
this
academic role. So that's my academic role. So there's a whole world of sort of the non-academic side that is also part of my history here.
But how did you get interested in physics and know that you wanted to go down this road? And then how did that evolve into the physics with social justice, like those two together?
I would probably say I did an undergraduate and joint master's in computer science during my undergraduate years, and then I switched to physics. So I would say it was sometime in 1988 or 89 that I realized that I loved physics and I wanted to do physics. Before that, I knew I was interested in physics, but it was sitting in graduate level physics classes or upper level undergraduate physics classes that I knew I absolutely love this field and I enjoy everything about it. And that hasn't changed. I still love physics. I love not necessarily all the content of it or the way it's done, but how it trained me in ways that I use in non-physics environments. But my social justice work actually came entirely independently of that. In 1991, I was at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst to do my Ph.D. in physics. And I had a teaching assistantship to support myself. Mm-hmm. And the graduate students, graduate employees, the teaching assistants, the research assistants were all unionized. Or we're trying to form a union and get a contract. I mean, we had formed a union. We were trying to get a contract. And with the labor troubles that were there, the graduate employees decided to go on strike. Now, this was about 3 years after I got to this country. So because I came to the United States in 1988. So I would always say that when people ask me how I became a social justice activist, I cut my teeth on a strike line. I was a labor activist first and foremost. And that has always been with me throughout all these years, that I am a labor person. I'm a union guy. I'm a labor activist. A lot of my understanding of social justice issues that came on issues of race and foreign policy and militarization and war and so on came from that starting point from which I branched out, many of which I connect back to it, but many of which I just branched out because I had started with that cutting my teeth on a strike line. So really, it was an interesting moment because I really didn't have a lot of political consciousness or activism prior to that. But so when I did go on strike, I knew I was taking a risk because if the strike had failed or if I had been fired for being on strike, I would have lost my only source of support to be in this country and I would have had to leave. So right. I knew I was taking a chance then. And yeah. I can't sit here many years later and say, I took that chance because I knew, workers' rights. No, none of it was true. I actually went on strike because I saw my friends on the strike line. That was about the level of my political consciousness. And so some incipient notions of solidarity, I guess. I didn't want to cross a strike line. Again, not part of my consciousness. It's not like I knew as a rule, one should not be a scab. One should not cross a strike line. None of that were really as clear cut as if I said that it was clear cut, that would not be true. So that's where I got started. But over the years after that, I became both within that union, the Graduate Employees Union. But in other arenas, I got more involved in issues of racial justice, issues of U.S. foreign policy, anti-war work, immigrant rights, and so on. And I brought that with me when I came to the University of Detroit Mercy, because in fact, when I was applying for jobs in the late 90s, one was lucky to get a job anywhere as the kind of job that I have, which is a tenure track position. But I really did look for universities that were in urban areas, which had a good long history of social justice struggles, and where I felt like I could not only do my physics teaching, which was an independent entity on its own, but also continue to do my community activism work. And hey, being at a Jesuit and Mercy institution was a perfect place to be. The questions I was asked, even during my interview, about questions of social justice and how it connected with my physics teaching and learning, were just told me that this was a place I wanted to be at. And I was lucky, I got hired. So I have not ever regretted or looked back on that decision.
Yeah, you definitely landed in a good spot with the Jesuits.
Yep. And the Sisters of Mercy. I always say the Jesuits tend to be the more intellectual arm of the social justice movement, but as a shout out to the Sisters of Mercy, they kick ass.
Yes,
they are always on the front line. They're always on the front line. I have actually, even before I came to Detroit Mercy, I had worked, not necessarily that I was conscious or aware of the various denominations, like the various orders, like the Sisters of Mercy or the Dominican Sisters and so on. But I had worked with many Catholic nuns and so on as part of the anti-war work that I was doing. I at least got to meet them. I saw them in rallies and things. So I was aware of their presence in the nuclear abolition movement and an anti-war movement. So I used to see them a lot more. And that was true also in the early years that I was here.
Wow. It's interesting you said that about the union strikes. My dad was a Teamsters truck driver, and so I grew up with all of that, and so it was just a part of who we were. And you just
right. It was one of my first forays into questions of real solidarity, because 91 was when the Graduate Employees Organization went on strike, and I was on strike, and a week later it was done. But I think it was 93 or 94 when the Teamsters under Ron Carey also were on strike nationwide, basically the UPS workers and so on. And so I do distinctly remember going with friends into some little way off part in Massachusetts. I mean, I had been in the country for, let's say, 5 years or so, but I got in a car and went off to go be on a picket line with a bunch of Teamsters and UPS drivers. And so people, not people I not naturally would associate with, because I was a student in an academic institution and so on. But there I was, standing on a picket line with Teamsters, UPS drivers who were Teamsters.
So then you end up at this Jesuit university, and I'm curious because I know that the Jesuits and the Mercy Sisters are huge social justice people. But so what does it look like at a Jesuit university for physics and social justice to kind of like be lived out in real time?
It took me a long time to figure that out. And I always felt a little odd, because I was very active in the community in the city of Detroit on questions of racial justice, not so much in my city of Ferndale, where I live now, not so much in the city of Southfield, where I used to live then. But I also worked a lot on issues of anti-war stuff with various groups in the early years that I was here, late 90s, early 2000s. And I was also doing a lot of work with the Palestinian issue for Palestinian liberation. So I used to work with groups like the Michigan Committee on Jerusalem and so on. But my physics was entirely separate from that. And so I'd come to work and I'd have to, basically set aside everything, lots of things about who I was, and then enter a physics classroom, more or less devoid of that part of me. And I think that that's a failing in physics itself, which is being rectified by a lot of people, and a lot of people have been fighting that for decades, long before I was even born, people were always trying to combine social justice with the work that physicists do. But at this university and other places, it was not really so much part of the language. Now, of course, we all learned the concepts in the language of cura personalis, and we applied it in our teaching and learning and so on in our colleagueship, but not so much that we applied it to areas of solidarity and social justice that were outside of those arenas, including the question of what does it mean and what does it really mean to be a Jesuit university in an urban area? Just how is it that we just, which of course is the major thing for the Jesuits, to be in urban areas and to be part of those and make that part of their mission. But those were questions I asked to myself, is like, how do I combine these two? So I'd say about 4 years, I got lucky. And I don't want to make it all sound like it was all part of a great plan, but I got lucky in that when I first got here, I was part of electrical engineering. Physics was part of electrical engineering, so I was a faculty member in electrical engineering. And one of the electrical engineering faculty was Sister Sandy Yost, who was a sister of St. Joseph. And she and I got to talking, and I shared with her a bunch of my community activist work that I had done since my grad school days. So it was already 7 or 8 years, and I had been part of the Student Senate leadership. I'd been the president of the Graduate Student Senate. I'd been involved in lots of initiatives there. So we got started talking, and she invited me to help organize an event with her. And then subsequently, that led me to connections with women and gender studies. Those days, they were called women's studies. So I actually served on the steering committee of women's studies at Detroit Mercy. And from there, it just, it built up in me the fact that I was teaching physics. I was doing community activism. And then there was this third piece where I was doing maybe involved in social justice related conversations on campus, but not necessarily as a physicist, but maybe more as a human being. Right. So I tried to combine those two. I presented some papers on racial justice issues in technology, Silicon Valley, high tech, and so on. Yeah. And then subsequently, I realized that what I felt was really missing in the work that I was doing on campus was a course or something to bring, or to do in the existing physics courses, to bring these social justice issues into it. Well, I didn't know how to do it in physics. So I didn't know how to take my physics course that I was teaching and put integrate social justice issues into it. In those days, I'm talking about the early 2000s. But what I did do, and I knew I could do, was I created a course called Science, Technology, and Race. The Jesuits actually gave me a stipend, a summer stipend, to develop that course. It was $3,000 or so. I think it was in 2009. And I developed a course called Science, Technology, and Race that I offered to the African American Studies as a course that was part of their program. Oh, yeah. And so for the first time, I was teaching a course that really built upon my interests and a little bit of my research that I had done before then, but also built upon social justice issues. So this semester, I'm still teaching that course all these years later. It hasn't been offered every single year, but it has been offered enough times. It's my favorite course to teach in many ways, even a little bit more even than physics, because it really, every time I teach the course, I'm bringing all my political community activism together with a course that I'm teaching. Right. So it took me until about 2022 to find a way to actually integrate social justice issues into my physics class. But I really started up having those two worlds still be separate. Yeah. Wow, that's great. Yeah, and I did listen. I'll include that interview that you did in the show notes for people that you did not too long ago about gender studies and physics, and it's important. Yeah. Right. That was on the occasion of Black History Month a couple of years ago, and I was interviewed by local station WDET, and I really talked about how I managed to incorporate questions of race, gender, and indigenous knowledge into my existing physics course. It really was something that I'm very proud of, because it took a long time to get to that point, to figure out how to do it, and to do it in a way that the students would respond well to. Yeah. In part of your social justice work,
part of that was being involved in nuclear abolition.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about like how did that come about? What did that look like? What was involved in that? And then maybe we can talk a little bit more about why nuclear abolition. I know it seems like it would be obvious, but why it's important.
That's actually that's a great question because I didn't think into the way you've asked the question. So I actually appreciate that because now I've had to think a little bit more differently about the origins of my activism on nuclear abolition. I think that it is probably fair to say, it's probably more accurate to say that my work on nuclear abolition and including US foreign policy on nuclear threat reduction and nuclear weapons in general and so on came because of two reasons. One, that my work on all these other works, particularly my work on anti-war issues, generally
Right.
speaking, anti-war, whether it was the Iraq War of 2003, or even defending immigrant rights after 9/11 and so on, or all the other things that came after the Israel-Palestine issue and so on, brought me in contact with a number of people in the anti-war movement in Detroit.
Oh.
And some of the people who were in that anti-war movement were part of the group Peace Action of Michigan. And
Oh,
of
okay.
course, Peace Action is the largest anti-war organization, not anti-war, largest nuclear abolition and anti-nuclear organization and advocacy organization in the United States. And Peace Action of Michigan has been pretty active over all these years in anti-war movements, in advocacy for nuclear threat reduction, and so on. So I used to work with a number of people doing other kinds of work, and then they invited me to serve on their board, the Peace Action of Michigan board. So and along the way, I gave a few talks about things related to nuclear weapons and included even in some cases nuclear energy and so on, climate change, climate catastrophe, and nuclear weapons, also nuclear weapons and how it relates to questions of democracy. And I did talk at one point. I was invited to talk a little bit more about what I would generally call a bucket list that the nuclear abolition movement should have, because at least locally, tended to be a group of mostly older, mostly white people and mostly middle class. And it was something that we all knew and still know that is a serious weakness in the nuclear abolition movement, certainly here in Michigan, but also it's something that is true nationwide in many ways. And so the question was, how do we bring young people in?
Right.
And so that's how I got involved in it. Along the way, actually, in working with other people or being in conversation with them, I incorporated some aspects of nuclear energy as part of the conversation itself, because I came to learn that you can't dissociate those two completely. Nuclear energy produces the kind of national security state that I think undermines democracy. You don't have just nuclear power plants just floating around. Every time you create a nuclear power plant, the level of national security that goes around it and so on is remarkable. So I think there's a model or a vision of society that is incompatible with democratic norms, even in the production of nuclear energy. And of course, nuclear weapons is not just any other kind of weapon of war. It's really takes it to a whole new level and produces existential dangers that maybe others don't, other forms of weaponry don't. So, but I got involved in all of that and have continued that. In fact, I was asked by Peace Action of Michigan if I would do we always do a Hiroshima Day commemoration, Hiroshima Nagasaki Day commemoration, but we do it on Hiroshima Day. We do an event. We usually invite someone, and I was asked this year if I would be the person who would do the lecture, give the talk for Hiroshima Day. And I said I would be happy to do so, and I would particularly talk about the intersection of AI, or the use of AI, artificial intelligence, and nuclear weapons and nuclear energy. Now, how do these areas intersect? And so people need to know more about the dangers that we face and how that connects nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, climate change, and artificial intelligence, all of which I think at some level are life destroying, they are democracy undermining, and they are national security apparatus kind of things that we talk about.
Right. Yeah, I didn't think about the connection between AI and nuclear weapons. Yeah, they are all earth-shattering. We know, I mean, I know we have different ages of people who are listening to. I don't worry, I'm Gen X, right? So like, I mean, we learned about it, but it's so far removed. Like it was, you know, it's 19th century. I mean, it's 20th century. It's the 1900s.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit about that, and then but also from a physicist perspective as well? I mean, obviously we know it's bad because it kills people, but I think in light of the situation in Iran that's happening right now, obviously that threat again is very high. And I think maybe it would be helpful for people to articulate it and to hear like why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there have only been really two instances in two very deliberate instances. I have to be careful. There have only been two very deliberate, intentional instances of the use of atomic bombs or nuclear weapons, it's like, as we call it. There are two different versions of it. There's the hydrogen bomb, and the other one that's considered just a more, it's a little bit different. It's the original version that came out, Fat Man and Little Boys, that were called as the ones that transported and the planes that transported these bombs, but they were atomic weapons. Subsequently, a few years after the end of World War II, by the early 50s, both the Soviet Union and the United States and other countries had begun and had produced hydrogen bombs, which just takes that to a next sort of a new level. But the bottom line is there were only two instances, deliberate intentional instances, where atomic weapons have been used, and they were in Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th of 1945. While the act itself is pretty clear in what was done and its devastating consequences for the Japanese, it turns out that even after all these years, there still remains remnants of a debate about why it was done, and the arguments about whether it was necessary or not. Did it help end the war or not? Was it done to defeat the Japanese, or was it done to send a warning to the Soviets or not? And these kinds of questions still sort of remain even after we've opened up a lot of the records, and historians have gotten access to Soviet records and so on. That debate still kind of continues, but it doesn't take away from the fact that these are weapons of mass destruction. It doesn't take away from the fact that we knew that before we dropped them. And as many people have presumably seen the movie Oppenheimer, that focused a lot on Oppenheimer himself and his role in the production of those bombs. Even in that film, you get the sense that I use the word awesome or tremendous power of these weapons. It's so much so that even for a fleeting moment, and it only was fleeting, a fleeting moment, there was concern that even the testing of the first one in Los Alamos would destroy the entire Earth by vaporizing the atmosphere. So it was just a fleeting. Very soon it was determined that the chances of that were almost close to zero. But that gives you a sense of the fear and the uncertainty even among those who are testing it. Right. What is important about, and why people should be concerned about it, is that even then certainly, because it was part of the Manhattan Project and was a project that was initiated definitely out of a fear, as evidenced even by someone like Albert Einstein, that the Nazis would actually have such an atomic weapon. There was some evidence that they were working on it to acquire such a weapon, after it had been shown in the late 30s that nuclear fission was possible, and that the splitting of the atom was possible, and that the splitting of the atom generated levels of energy unknown prior to that on Earth, meaning that people had some idea that maybe it might be a source of the sun's energy and so on, but even that was in its infancy. But it was very clear when it was done, among other places in the University of Chicago, and so on, that the splitting of the atom released a tremendous amount of energy.
Wow.
And that was the basis of the atomic bomb. It was known that the Nazis knew it and that they might be working on the bomb, so there was a lot of fear. So the Manhattan Project got started, and because it was a wartime project, it established a tremendous amount of secrecy and a national security apparatus around it. And when we came out of the war, there was a tremendous debate in the United States about the level of national security and secrecy that needed to be maintained with that. And without getting into all the debates and the histories and so on of it, a lot of which I do not know about, what was ultimately decided was that the United States would continue in its development of atomic weapons. It would try to develop the hydrogen bomb. It did so in response to what was considered then the new threat from Soviet communism. And the Soviets themselves recognized this threat, as did the Chinese and Britain and France and so on. And so everyone started developing that, and all of them developed national security apparatuses to help promote the production of atomic and nuclear weapons. And I would argue that they're doing that then has carried on to this day to fundamentally undermine the democratic functioning of societies. And that's why we should be concerned about it. As long as we have nuclear weapons, we are producing an existential threat for not only other countries, but also for ourselves and for humanity. And that's why it's such a deeply social justice issue. But we are also undermining, in our own case, or any country that's doing so, democracy. You cannot have a fully democratic society when you are producing an existential threat, such as atomic weapons, done under tremendous levels of secrecy and a national security apparatus that is not something we quote unquote vote on or is transparent, where people know this stuff. I mean, nobody, all of it is done under secrecy. People will argue for why it should be, and those are good debates to have. But the fact that it is there and it is being done that way, I think produces the seeds of an undemocratic authoritarian society. And that is another reason. So besides the existential threat of the use of nuclear weapons, there is a second threat, and that is the threat to undermine democratic norms in any society.
So creation really of the atomic bomb in 1945, I mean, that was what got the ball rolling. The fact that we are here today in 2026 in this state of democracy in our country, falling apart, it led us to this. I mean, it would just keep snowballing because it kind of set the foundation. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it established. I would be hesitant to make a beeline or a direct line between then and now, because of course history always is a combination of very complex factors and new actors and new events and so on that fundamentally change the nature of how societies respond to each other or to themselves. But I would say that but to the extent that it has been possible to maintain a national security apparatus on the one hand since that time, second, to be in competition with other nuclear powers rather than in cooperation with them. And let's keep in mind there's been a remarkable amount of work, anti-nuclear work done, including by physicists. Physicists have been at the lead. Physicists particularly, and scientists in general, have led the fight to rid the world of nuclear weapons in many ways. So in many arenas, you will see physicists and scientists working on that. And their fundamental idea was we are all human. We all should, this is an existential threat to humanity, not just to one country or the other. That's the nature of this weapon. You can't just bomb another country with nuclear weapons and imagine that your life you're not going to get affected either by the immediate bombing itself or by all the fallout, not just the radiation fallout, but the social, political fallout that comes from that. We have seen the proliferation of nuclear weapons as a consequence of these ideas of détente and so on, mutually assured destruction, all of which were political ideologies aimed at one, trying to stave off that existential threat, but at the same time allow countries like the United States and the Soviet Union and so on to continue to build on their nuclear weapons arsenal. So we have been on this unstable, secret national security and hostile foreign policy approach for decades now.
Right.
And so when I hear about the Trump administration or Biden, or for that matter, the Obama administration and so on, talking about Iran is having nuclear weapons as an existential threat for the United States, for the Middle East, for Israel, for anybody else, I think we have to recognize that this is the same language that we have heard over decades in
Right.
relation to other countries. Or when
Right.
India and Pakistan, when Pakistan develops nuclear weapons because India developed nuclear weapons, and therefore Pakistan sees it as an existential threat for them, then once again we're undermining democratic norms. We are engaging in a kind of politic that dispenses with, ignores, sideswipes human needs in society in favor of this extremely complex, very expensive structure. And then if you ask yourself, well, where do we get the raw materials for these nuclear weapons? The answer is a lot of it comes out of nuclear energy. So while nuclear energy does not produce the actual material that is used in nuclear weapons, part of the problem with that we argue with Iran about is the fact that you can take the materials that are used for nuclear energy production and enrich the uranium, for example, to where it becomes bomb grade level. And so it could be bomb grade uranium. And at that point, whether you make a dirty bomb or you make an actual nuclear atomic weapon is something that people can debate. But the fact is that nuclear, if you stop enriching the uranium at a particular point, you can use it for nuclear energy. If you continue enriching it for further, you get bomb grade materials. You can also use the byproducts of nuclear energy production in producing nuclear weapons. So all of this brings in both nuclear energy and nuclear weapons under a national security umbrella. And that's what's been happening in a bunch of these countries. So when we talk about the fight against Iran and this threat that Iran, and I will say a threat Iran supposedly poses, and I use the word supposedly here because we have heard from the current president and from previous presidents too about differing statements about whether the threat actually exists or not, including from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so that's why I bring nuclear energy and nuclear weapons together, because they're part and parcel of what I would call the national security apparatus. And I think we have to pay attention to that. We are mortgaging the future, mortgaging future generations when we fail to recognize that we're basically passing along a world in which this threat remains and is seen as a solution to foreign policy matters. Okay, we need to take Iran's nuclear weapons depots and all of this stuff. We need to bomb all the nuclear facilities. I don't think it helps humanity as a whole find ways based in social justice, or to use what Dr. King popularized, the beloved community, where conflicts can be resolved through processes of truth and reconciliation, not rather through the hostilities that lead to ways that harm all of us. And that's one of the reasons why my social justice work also fits in well with the idea of nuclear abolition. I don't think we will ever be really truly rid of war, or for that matter, all these other problems that we're facing with climate change and so on, when the underlying ideology that we use in why we produce nuclear weapons and why we threaten other countries with it and why we think other countries would threaten us with it, as long as that remains, I think we will always be imprisoned within a particular mindset that does not allow us to address these other problems.
Right. And also one of the things you said struck me is we forget that the fact that we have nuclear weapons makes us an existential threat to everyone else.
Correct. And we have used it in that manner.
And we're the only ones who have intentionally used it. So
That's
as you
right.
said.
The reason I say intentionally also is not just because others have used it unintentionally, but rather there have been unintentional harms caused by, and I say unintentional very guardedly so that I don't want people to think that I'm saying it was truly unintentional. But there's been so much nuclear weapons testing done around the world,
Right.
the Marshall Islands and so on. And every time a country tests nuclear weapons, as we did decades ago, actual testing, we've been harming the environment. We've
Yes.
been clearing land and dispossessing people to in order to conduct those tests. We have been doing. There's a phrase for this: radioactive colonialism, where we have been appropriating and dispossessing indigenous peoples, not just in the United States, but also in countries like India and elsewhere, because they have happened to live for generations in areas that we now consider uranium rich or thorium rich or so on.
Right.
And we want the uranium and the thorium that we can get in order to power our nuclear energy power plants, but also to continue to build on our nuclear weapons arsenals and the overall nuclear weapons project. So, and this has been happening all across. So that's the only sense in which I call it intentional, in that it doesn't start with the idea of using a bomb against someone, but it starts with the idea that if we're going to continue to build bombs or continue to build nuclear energy, then we're going to dispossess people from the lands that they live in, from their livelihoods and so on, and extract these materials from the earth to produce an uncertain future.
Right. I forgot about, that they're testing it. So every time we test a nuclear weapon, even if people aren't affected directly, it does affect the environment. And I thought I heard someone say, and you might be able to speak to this more correctly, but that in the first, 2-3 weeks since the bombing in Iran and elsewhere, that it's set off emissions equivalent to about 84 countries.
War has always been a great harmful factor in climate change or in climate destruction, environmental degradation. And the United States Army, which fascinating, has its own sustainability plan, and has its own plans for removing toxic waste produced by military tests, as well as military excursions and so on, training and all of that. It was fascinating for me to read some of that stuff. That it is one of the largest purveyors of environmental degradation in the world ever in history, the United States Army, because of the number of battles that we've been involved, number of wars that we've been involved in, and the number of bombs that we have dropped, and as well on this side, the amount of testing that we have done about these things. And so I don't know the exact numbers for something like the war in Iran, but it is clear that these wars have a tremendous impact, not just in terms of emissions and so on, but the harm that they bring to ecosystems. Yes. and to the environment itself. I mean, everybody gets harmed.
Right.
And we think that because we're bombing Iran, that somehow we are safe from the environmental degradation, the environmental consequences, and so on, and the harm that is committed by bombing Iran. But that's not true.
Right.
Because the testing for those bombs, the production of those bombs, and the training of our armies, our military, to use those bombs and so on, they're also part and parcel of the actual bombing campaign itself. That's one. And our attempt to get all the raw materials that we need, whether it's uranium, thorium, or something else, these are also part of the bombing campaign itself. And so all of these are part of the environmental harm and degradation that's being caused, let alone talking about the people who are killed in these bombing campaigns. So I think, yes, I think the United States war in general and the United States' role in wars in recent times have both been great purveyors of environmental harm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when I start thinking about it, I'm like, maybe we make too big a deal of straws and we should be making a bigger deal of weapons. I know it all is important and it all works together. So I'm thinking about this. Obviously, war. I mean, we know it affects human beings. Like that's the number one. It affects the economy. It affects the environment. What do you what do you wish the average person like understood about the crossroads of physics and social justice and nuclear abolition, kind of like all these pieces together?
I think, and I'll split it up into two broad categories: a conversation within the physics community
Okay.
at large, the broader physics community, where I think we need to recognize our social responsibilities.
Okay.
I don't think it is sufficient. I don't think it is actually right, appropriate for us as physicists to continue to work on what is actually a lot of wonderful physics, the inventions that physicists are involved in, technological inventions, as well as the theories we work on and so on, and the projects that are involved in, whether it's sending someone to the moon or something else. These are things that physicists and astronomers work on. I think to do it almost in seclusion, the ivory tower syndrome, if you will, by claiming that physics is neutral and apolitical and only studies the natural world and is not part and parcel of the larger problems in society, which would physicists do argue are somebody else's problems and things that somebody else caused. I think this is not fair. I think it's not accurate. It's not true. I think the kinds of questions and the projects that physicists work on, the technological innovations and theoretical advancements that we make, all make us very much a part of larger society. Nothing exemplifies that as much as our role as physicists in the creation, production, and continued use of nuclear weapons, or even nuclear energy. I think we need to be involved in these conversations, not just as physicists guidance or expertise to these projects, but we really need to think as humans. We need to think from the perspectives of the common good. We need to think from the perspectives of social justice. To use the phrase that Jesuits love to use, we need to see God in all things.
Right.
And I think it's important for us not to just be stuck in our own little area and do it. Now, people would argue that, well, but your physics expertise is needed, and society's progress you can't tell people not to do this or that, because all of it is part of progress. And the way physics is used is not necessarily the fault of, if it's used badly, it's not necessarily the fault of physicists. I don't agree with that. I think first and foremost, every physicist has a responsibility to be a good human, to work along the values of the common good. One should not be engaged in things that if we know them to be evil. Now, I'll say that guardedly, because more often than not, it is never easy to know whether something is good or bad. Most technology, most theories, most innovation significantly more complex in the way that they are socially constructed or used. But I would say physicists need to be thinking about it. I think it's possible to be an anti-racist physicist. I think it's possible to be an environmentally conscious physicist. I think it's possible and necessary to be a feminist physicist. I think we really need to see that our role as physicists is only one piece of a larger role that we have of what I would call good citizenship, to be good stewards of society for the common good. Right. And that's language that I learned a lot from being at this university. and I appreciate that, because it's not easy to have those conversations purely within the physics community itself. Now, there are a lot of people who've been doing it for many decades and have been trying really hard, but it still is a great challenge for physics to step into spaces of social justice and say, we need to be in these spaces. We need to talk about racism in physics, but also how physics, what is the social responsibility of physicists during times of great racial upheaval? What should we have been doing in times of Jim Crow? If you're a physicist, what is your role in society during times of Jim Crow? You can't just sit in your lab and say, I'm doing physics. Because the question is, who is not in that lab? Who is not allowed to the universities? Those were questions that were very important for us then. And how we answered them told us a lot about who we were and what we thought our responsibilities were for society. What is our role from the time that nuclear weapons have been produced? It's not enough for us to say, we just did the physics for the production of nuclear weapons. We let the politicians decide who's going to produce it. No, I think we have a very serious responsibility. And we need to fulfill that responsibility, talking about, as physicists, not just about whether it's good or bad to build a nuclear weapon. What does it mean? We shouldn't just be talking about different models of nuclear energy or different models of nuclear weapons or things like that. As physicists, we should also step into that arena which says, we are promoting good citizenship. We want to promote the common good. We want to promote the idea that of a common humanity that unites us all, and ask ourselves whether the work that we are doing as physicists, as well as the work and whether that's where does it stand, what is its role in society, but also how can we be in solidarity with other social movements that don't necessarily come from physics, but come from outside of physics. Black Lives Matter, for example, could be a good. What is our role in these social upheavals? Where do we stand? We can't just be bystanders or seclusion or in seclusion somewhere else. I think it's very important for us to be out there, and a lot of physicists are doing that, but it still is a challenge within the broader physics community. So that's what I would like to say for the physics community, but I also would like to say that to the general public, which is, I think it's important for us to step beyond our disciplinary expertise, to step beyond our ethnic, racial, and other social constructs, to ask ourselves those questions of solidarity. Can we hear, to use words that are well known within Jesuit circles, can we hear the cry of the poor? Do we hear the cry of the earth? How do we respond to those cries that we hear? And how do we do it in such a way that we can promote the common good, how we can promote social justice? And I think that is very critical for everyone. I don't think we're going to solve the problems in this world unless we are in solidarity with each other.
Right.
And to paraphrase a Union saying, the liberation of one is tied to the liberation of all. We cannot be free as physicists unless people who are not physicists are also free from the challenges they face in their lives. And I think it's just important for us to recognize that. I think it's important for all educators, such as my colleagues at this university. I would always say that to them. You can't just be teaching your courses and think that's your job, because your job is to teach students. There's a lot more going on in the students' lives, and a lot of stuff happening outside our university that greatly influences the future. Artificial intelligence, for that matter.
Right.
So if we say, well, I don't know enough about artificial intelligence, well, but we're scientists here, we're academics here. We should step into this. We should learn what we need to learn and step in with a set of values that, once again, I would always push, that to be for solidarity, to be for freedom, to be for social justice, for the common good, and ask ourselves how those values lead us into the conversations about, should we be using AI? What kind of harm and benefits does AI produce in the world around us? Who is being harmed by this?
Right.
Who is benefiting from AI? And they give us, and to evaluate our own role in it based on the answers we get for those things. So I think it's important for us all to look at that. Now, we live in a highly polarized society, and we definitely live in a very polarized world. So it's hard to maintain hope at all times that we will be able to work our way through these things. But it should always be a place where we look at the great work being done. I mean, the former Pope's Laudato Si was definitely something that provided, certainly to Catholics, but beyond Catholics too, the idea that there is a new vision, there is a different vision of the world that we can push, that is based on these values of solidarity and common good. And I think that it's so many people around the world doing social justice work that we should take a lot of hope from it.
Right.
And ought to take the late Reverend Jesse Jackson's phrase that he always used in his speeches, it's important for us to keep hope alive,
Right.
even in dark times, and to see that there's a lot of good that we can build up from in order to do that.
Right. Yeah, it does seem like there is a break that's coming that will be for good, right?
I would hope so. I think it's always a question of how well organized the various, as I always say I'm a materialist, but like the question of how well organized are the various social and political forces. I always
Yes.
take great hope in the fact that I work with a lot of people, both at the university, but a lot outside of the university, working on issues of social justice. Now, not everybody sees the work that I do as issues of social justice itself. If they're harmed by it, they see it as something that harms them. So it's up to me to be able to argue for the socially just, argue why my vision of the world, or a collective vision of the world based on these values, is our values for a socially just world. But I think it's important for us to do that, to have those conversations, to push those values in places where that's not even being talked about.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Wow, this is good stuff, and excited to go back and listen to it again. So I can take it all in. Anything else that you wanted to share that maybe I was like, I would really want them to know she didn't ask this thing or anything like that.
Well, I mean, if people, certainly because this is your podcast is about faith and social justice and so
Yeah.
on. I'd like people to know I want to talk a little bit about sort of the non-academic side of my, well, yeah, for people who are listening to this, I want to emphasize the fact that I did it is not anything special. It is in fact more an evidence that people can do this if they want, in as much as they might see it as useful or not. Besides being on the steering committee of the Women and Gender Studies program and being an affiliate faculty in African American Studies, I've served on the Provost Anti-Racism Task Force over the years. I was part of a larger team that helped build a new equity, transparency, and accountability based hiring process for faculty and administrators.
Nice.
I was the president of the faculty union for 8 years and served on the union board for 20 years. Again, coming out of my labor activist stance. And I have been a promoter for racial justice issues on campus itself, not just off campus. And I've done all of this while continuing to teach the classes that I teach. So my labor activism and my racial justice activism and so on have found expression within my work on campus itself. But probably in recent years, one of the most significant projects that I have worked on was when the University of Detroit Mercy signed on to Pope Francis's 7-year journey on Laudato Si. And the university signed on to it. Was then the assistant to the president for mission and mission integration. And so I was involved in it pretty close to the start, helped form the task force that was given the responsibility of working on the 7-year action plan, the Laudato Si action platform, and helped put forward or organize a number of initiatives under that. And one of the reasons I did that was because not only did it help to it didn't bring it through physics, and that was fine with me, but it brought my social justice activism that was outside the community by including environmental justice advocacy. It brought it into the space of the campus. And through this vehicle, or this instrument that Pope Francis had written, and when I read through the Laudato Si encyclical, I was very impressed. I mean, I was blown away in many ways, because I think it is important for us to recognize it actually was a very radical document. It really asks for us to make a significant, decisive break from what he called the technocratic paradigm. He did bring in nuclear weapons and so on. He brought in war. But I think that the idea of the common home, his idea of hearing the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor and how intertwined they are, I think these are all very radical messages. And it fit well for me, despite not being a Catholic and not actually being very religiously oriented, this was a great place for me to be involved in something that I understood and approached and had worked on for many years. So it's been one of the best things that I have. It's been very satisfying, soul satisfying, but also important part of the work that I've done at the university. So all of that has been part of my you might call it my non-academic side, if you will, but part of my life at the university, not just
Right.
teaching physics courses. So I think that's important for people to know that it can be done,
Right.
it should be done, and what it does is um, it really has a significant impact on our students when they hear about these things from us. In fact, before
Yes.
I came on this podcast, I was having a 20-minute conversation with a student about social justice issues and connecting it up with her coursework, including in biostatistics. So to be able to do that, though, is not something that one can do just off a whim. We have
Right.
to train ourselves. We have to be involved in it. We have to educate ourselves to know American history, to know Black history, to know about racial justice issues, and to be able to understand it well enough to be able to express it in a conversation, bring it in and make those connections. I think that's the responsibility of educators.
Yes. Oh, wow. That's excellent. I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, how much you bring from your personal life of being an advocate for social justice and then bringing that into everything that you do in the classroom and on campus. And I think you're right. It's important for professors to share that part of them with their students as because all of that shapes them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have
Absolutely.
a great opportunity you have a great opportunity to shape the generations that are hopefully going to be coming into leadership, right?
Yes, and all of this is going to come with a lot of conflict. It's going to
Yeah.
come with, we're going to make mistakes. God knows I could fill a book with all the mistakes I've made in my life in working on social justice issues. It's going to come with very uncomfortable moments. It's going to come with times when it feels like there's not a lot of hope. It comes at times when you feel like the work you've been done is being destroyed right in front of your eyes. I mean, I've done DEI work for a very long time now. So when the new administration came in and started and made it illegal, I guess, to do DEI, it was like my work was being destroyed.
Yeah.
And that's how I saw it. That's how I read it. And so, but we just have to stick with it. And that's
Right.
one of the best lessons I've ever learned in my social justice advocacy from the work of not, but just from the work of faith-based activists.
Yes.
And that has been one of the most important lessons because I work with people, some of whom are in their 80s and their 90s, and are fighting for a world that they are likely not going to see.
Right.
A
That's a
world,
good point.
but they have been working at it for 60 years and they have not seen that world come into fruition, but they have seen maybe elements of that world come into fruition here and there. So I take great, it's a tremendous amount of encouragement for me and empowerment for me to be in the presence of my elders in the social justice community and recognize they've been doing it for 60 years. I have no right to complain about something that didn't go well yesterday or last week or the year before. We need to stick it out. We need to do it. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make enemies. We're going to make friends. We're going to win some. We're going to probably lose a lot more as social justice activists for example, on nuclear abolition. I mean, I know people have been working for 60 years or something like that on nuclear
Right.
abolition. Well, they haven't seen it. But what drives them? And whatever it is that drives them, whether it's their faith or anything else, is something that we really need to admire as part of the human spirit. And the fact that I work with faith-based activists whose faith propels them to continue to work on this in the face of tremendous loss, but also in the face of great uncertainty, I think is one of the most powerful things that I have seen. And I always take a lot of my own hope from that.
Yeah. That's a good word to leave people with that hope.
Yep,
So
absolutely.